The massive space station called Nexus Prime floated like a metal city among the stars. Ships from dozens of different worlds docked at its ports every day. Inside its gleaming halls, aliens from across the galaxy met to discuss trade, politics, and the future of their civilizations. Today was special because humanity had finally earned the right to join these important talks. Commander Jake Morrison stepped off the human transport ship and looked around the docking bay. He had seen many strange sights during his years as a soldier and diplomat, but this place still amazed him. Creatures with 6 arms carried cargo boxes, while others that looked like walking crystals supervised the work. The air buzzed with dozens of different languages, and translation devices worked overtime to help everyone understand each other. Jake was a tall man with graying hair and calm blue eyes. He wore the simple dark blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. Behind him walked Captain Lisa Grant, a young engineer with short brown hair and sharp green eyes. She carried their files and equipment, while Jake focused on studying their surroundings. "Sir, are you nervous about the meeting?" Lisa asked quietly as they walked through the busy corridor. Jake smiled slightly. "I've faced worse things than a room full of politicians, Captain, even alien ones." They passed through security checkpoints, where guards from different species checked their credentials. Finally, they reached the main diplomatic hall. The room was enormous, with a domed ceiling that showed a perfect view of the stars outside. Curved tables arranged in circles filled the space, with each species having their own section. Jake found a small area marked for Earth's delegation. It was much smaller than the spaces given to the older, more established civilizations. He didn't mind. Humans were new to this galaxy-wide community, and they had to earn their place through actions, not words. As he sat down and reviewed his notes, a commotion started near the center of the room. A group of tall, elegant beings entered with great ceremony. Their skin looked like living crystal that caught and reflected the room's lights. These were the Veldorians, one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. The leader of their group was a female named Zarathus. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, and her crystalline features sparkled as she moved. Her people were known for their advanced mental abilities and their belief that they were superior to all other species. They had controlled much of galactic politics for hundreds of years. Zarathus took her place at the largest table, right in the center of the room. Her voice carried clearly as she spoke to her assistants, making sure everyone could hear her words. "I see the primitives from Earth have actually shown up," she said with a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. "How amusing that these mammals think they belong in civilized company." Several other Veldorians laughed along with her. Jake kept his face calm and continued reading his files, but Lisa noticed his jaw tighten just slightly. Zarathus wasn't finished. She stood up and spoke louder, addressing the entire room. "Fellow beings of intelligence and culture, I must express my concern about including such a backward species in our discussions. These humans still use chemical rockets to move between planets. They've barely learned to travel faster than light. What could they possibly contribute to conversations about advanced civilizations?" Some delegates from other species looked uncomfortable. The Kethmori, an ancient race known for their wisdom, exchanged worried glances. The Thorian traders shifted in their seats, but several species aligned with the Valdorians nodded in agreement. Jake finally looked up from his papers. His blue eyes met Zarathus' glowing crystal ones across the room. He stood slowly and spoke in a clear, steady voice. "Representative Zarathus, I thank you for your honest opinion. Earth looks forward to proving our worth through our actions in these negotiations." His calm response seemed to irritate Zarathus. She had expected anger or defensiveness, not quiet dignity. "Actions," she said with another tinkling laugh. "What actions could a species accomplish when they can barely understand basic physics? Your people still fight wars with metal projectiles while we manipulate matter at the molecular level with our minds." She gestured grandly, and several small objects on her table rose into the air and began spinning in complex patterns. The display was meant to show her species' advanced abilities. Perhaps, she continued, humans would be better suited to manual labor positions. I'm sure the galaxy has need for beings who can lift heavy objects and follow simple instructions. The insult was clear, and many delegates looked shocked by her rudeness. Even some Valdorians seemed embarrassed by their leader's behavior. Jake remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back, in a military posture. Representative Zarathus, every species brings unique strengths to any community. I believe these negotiations will show the value of cooperation over assumptions. Cooperation? Zarathus practically shrieked. What could humans possibly offer that would make cooperation worthwhile? Your technology is centuries behind ours. Your mental abilities are non-existent compared to telepathic species. Your lifespans are so short you barely have time to learn anything before you die. The room had fallen completely silent. All eyes moved between the tall crystal being and the calm human. Jake took a slow breath before responding. Time will tell. Representative Earth requests only the chance to participate fairly in these discussions. Zarathus sat down with a dismissive wave of her hand. Very well. Let us see what miracles these primitive mammals can produce. I'm sure it will be quite entertaining. As the formal session began, Jake returned to his seat. Lisa leaned over and whispered, "Sir, she's trying to provoke you into doing something stupid." "I know, Captain," Jake replied quietly, "but getting angry won't help humanity's cause. We'll let our work speak for itself." The opening ceremonies continued with speeches from various species leaders. Each one talked about trade opportunities, technological exchanges, and mutual benefits. When Jake's turn came to speak for Earth, he kept his remarks short and professional. Earth brings to this community our commitment to hard work, creative problem-solving, and fair dealing with all species. We look forward to contributing to the prosperity and peace of our galaxy. Zarathus made a show of yawning during his speech, but Jake noticed that several other delegates listened carefully to his words. As the first day of negotiations ended, Jake walked back to his quarters with Lisa. The corridors were quieter now, with most delegates retiring for their species rest periods. "Sir," Lisa said, "do you really think we can change their minds about us?" Jake looked out a large window at the stars beyond. "Lisa, I've learned that people often judge others by their own limitations. Zarathus sees only technology and mental powers, because that's what her people value most. She can't imagine that other strengths might be just as valuable. But what if she's right? What if we really don't belong here?" Jake smiled and put a fatherly hand on her shoulder. "Captain, I've been in situations where everyone counted us out before. Sometimes the best solutions come from the most unexpected places. We just need to stay true to what makes us human." As they reached their quarters, Jake could see Zarathus through a large viewing window. She was surrounded by her advisors, all of them looking pleased with themselves. They had no idea that they had just challenged the wrong species. The second day of negotiations began with what seemed like routine trade discussions. Representatives from different species talked about mining rights, shipping routes, and resource-sharing agreements. Jake listened carefully, taking notes and asking occasional questions that showed he understood the complex relationships between the various civilizations. But as the morning progressed, it became clear that something else was happening. Zarathus kept steering the conversation toward a specific topic. She mentioned several times the difficulties of managing large-scale operations across multiple star systems. Each time she brought it up, other delegates nodded seriously and agreed that such coordination was nearly impossible. Finally, during a break in the formal sessions, Zarathus stood and called for everyone's attention. Her crystal features gleamed as she smiled in what looked like friendship, but Jake could sense the trap being set. "My fellow delegates," she announced, "I believe we have an opportunity to demonstrate the practical value of our various species' capabilities. As we all know, The Helix Consortium mining operation has been stalled for over 30 years due to coordination problems. Murmurs spread through the room. Everyone knew about the Helix Consortium. It was meant to be the largest resource extraction project in galactic history, involving 17 different star systems. Each system had unique challenges, like dangerous gravity fields, hostile environments, and complex orbital mechanics. The potential profits were enormous, but no one had been able to figure out how to coordinate such a massive operation. Many of our finest minds have attempted to solve this puzzle, Zarathus continued. The Mentari tried using their advanced computer systems. The Kethdel attempted to use their hive mind coordination. Even my own people, with our telepathic abilities, have been unable to create a workable solution. She paused dramatically, letting her words sink in. Jake realized where this was heading, but he remained calm and kept listening. However, Zarathus said, turning to look directly at Jake, our newest member species claims to bring valuable problem-solving abilities to our community. Perhaps this would be an excellent opportunity for humanity to demonstrate these alleged skills. The trap was now obvious to everyone in the room. This wasn't a fair test or a genuine request for help. It was a setup designed to humiliate humanity by giving them an impossible task that had already defeated the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. Jake stood slowly. Representative Zarathus, could you provide more details about the specific challenges involved? Zarathus's smile grew wider. She activated a large holographic display that filled the center of the room. The image showed 17 star systems connected by dotted lines representing shipping routes. Each system pulsed with different colors, indicating various types of hazards and resources. The complexity is quite remarkable, she said, clearly enjoying herself. System 7 has gravity anomalies that shift every 43 days. System 12 contains hostile native lifeforms that attack mining equipment. System 4 has solar storms that disrupt all electronic systems for weeks at a time. The hologram zoomed in on different systems as she spoke, showing asteroid fields, gas giants with dangerous radiation, and planets with extreme weather patterns. The coordination requirements are staggering, Zarathus continued. 17 different extraction teams must work together, despite being separated by hundreds of light years. Each team needs different equipment, supplies, and support schedules. Weather, gravity, and other local conditions change constantly, requiring real-time adjustments to the overall plan. Jake studied the display carefully. He could see why the problem had stumped so many species. The traditional approach would be to create a massive central control system that tracked every variable and issued precise instructions to all 17 locations. But with communication delays, unexpected changes, and the sheer complexity of coordinating everything, such a system would be doomed to fail. Furthermore, Zarathus added, the profit margins are extremely tight. Even small inefficiencies or delays could make the entire operation unprofitable. Every decision must be perfect, and every action must be precisely timed. Several delegates shook their heads. The Thorian trademaster muttered something about impossible mathematics. A Kethmori elder closed his eyes as if trying to solve the problem through meditation. Of course, Zarathus said with false sweetness. I wouldn't want to impose such a burden on our human friends without giving them adequate time to consider the problem. Shall we say 72 hours for you to present a complete solution? The time limit was another part of the trap. 72 hours was barely enough to understand the problem fully, let alone solve it. Zarathus was making sure that Jake would fail publicly and decisively. Jake looked around the room. Some delegates appeared sympathetic but helpless. Others seemed interested in watching the spectacle. A few of the Valdorian allies were already smirking in anticipation of humanity's defeat. 72 hours will be sufficient, Jake said calmly. Zarathus blinked in surprise. She had expected him to ask for more time or try to negotiate better conditions. His immediate acceptance threw her off balance for a moment. Excellent. She recovered quickly. I look forward to seeing what creative solutions humanity can provide. I'm sure it will be most educational for all of us. The formal session ended, and delegates began to disperse. As Jake gathered his materials, several beings approached him with expressions of concern or sympathy. The Kethmori elder, Vorthak, shuffled over on his 4 legs. His ancient eyes showed genuine worry. Commander Morrison, this challenge is not fair. My people have computational abilities far beyond most species, and we spent months trying to solve this problem. The variables are simply too complex for any linear solution. I appreciate your concern, Elder Vorthak, Jake replied respectfully. But sometimes a fresh perspective can reveal new possibilities. A Thorian trader named Beckstar clicked his mandibles nervously. Human Jake, the mathematics alone require processing power that your species does not possess. Perhaps you could request assistance from other delegations. Thank you, Beckstar, but I think this is something humanity needs to handle independently. As more beings offered advice or sympathy, Jake noticed that his calm acceptance was having an unexpected effect. Instead of looking foolish for taking on an impossible task, he was earning respect for his courage and dignity. In the face of obvious persecution, Lisa waited until they were alone before speaking. Sir, with all due respect, this is insane. We don't have the computational resources to track 17 different star systems in real time. We don't have telepathic abilities to coordinate instantaneous communication. We don't even have the advanced physics knowledge that some of these species take for granted. Jake nodded. You're absolutely right, Captain. We don't have any of those things. Then how can we possibly solve this problem? Jake smiled mysteriously. By not trying to solve it the way everyone else has tried to solve it. They walked toward their quarters through corridors filled with beings from across the galaxy. Jake moved slowly, observing everything around him. He watched how different species interacted with each other, how they organized themselves, how they handled unexpected situations. Sir, what are you looking for? Lisa asked. Patterns, Captain? Humans are very good at recognizing patterns, even when we don't realize we're doing it. In their quarters, Jake activated their communication system and sent a message back to Earth. But instead of requesting help from scientists or computers, he did something that puzzled Lisa completely. He sent messages to his old ranch foreman in Montana, his former sergeant from the military, and a retired ship captain who had worked the asteroid mining routes. Sir, I don't understand. What can these people tell us about advanced physics and galactic coordination? Jake sat down and looked out at the stars. Lisa, what if the solution doesn't require advanced physics? What if it doesn't need telepathic coordination or massive computers? What if the answer is something much simpler? But sir, this problem has defeated the smartest species in the galaxy. Exactly, Jake said quietly, which means either the problem is truly impossible, or everyone has been approaching it wrong. Meanwhile, in her luxurious quarters, Zarathus was celebrating with her closest advisors. They had opened bottles of their finest crystalline wine, and were toasting their upcoming victory. The primitive will fail spectacularly, laughed Veltar, her chief aide. Then we can finally exclude Earth from any meaningful participation in galactic affairs. Indeed, Zarathus agreed. After this humiliation, no species will take humanity seriously. They'll be relegated to minor trading partners at best. But even as she celebrated, Zarathus felt a small nagging doubt. Jake Morrison's calm acceptance of the challenge had surprised her. Most beings would have either refused the impossible task or accepted it with visible fear and desperation. Jake had simply agreed, as if he already had a plan. She pushed the doubt aside. The problem was mathematically impossible for a species with humanity's limited abilities. In 72 hours, she would have her victory, and the galaxy would see that the Valdorians were right about the natural order of civilizations. While Zarathus and her advisors celebrated their expected victory, Jake Morrison did something that confused everyone who was watching him. Instead of rushing to computer terminals or requesting access to advanced calculation systems, he walked calmly to the station's observation deck. The observation deck was a large area with transparent walls that provided a perfect view of space. During busy negotiation periods, most delegates ignored this area, preferring to stay in their quarters or meeting rooms. But Jake found peace in watching the stars and the constant flow of ships coming and going from the station. He stood with his hands behind his back, looking out at a nearby nebula that painted the darkness in shades of purple and gold. His breathing was slow and steady, like a man taking a walk in a park rather than someone facing an impossible deadline. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez found him there after searching the entire station. She was young, probably in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and worried brown eyes. She had been assigned to assist the diplomatic mission and was clearly stressed about the situation they faced. "Commander Morrison, sir," she said breathlessly, "I've been looking everywhere for you. Shouldn't we be working on the Helix problem? We only have 68 hours left." Jake turned to her with a gentle smile. "We are working on it, Lieutenant. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to step back and see it clearly." Amy looked confused. "Sir, I don't understand. Every other species that tried to solve this used their most advanced computers and their smartest scientists. The men worked for 6 months with machines that can process millions of calculations per second. How can we compete with that?" "Tell me something, Amy," Jake said, still looking out at the stars. "Where did you grow up?" The question seemed to come from nowhere, but Amy answered anyway. "Nebraska, sir. My family had a corn farm." "A farm," Jake repeated thoughtfully. "How big?" "About 3,000 acres. We also raised some cattle and chickens." Jake nodded. "So your family had to coordinate planting schedules, harvest timing, animal feeding, equipment maintenance, weather planning, market prices, and probably dozens of other factors, all at the same time." "Well, yes, sir, but that's completely different from managing 17 star systems, is it?" Jake asked quietly. Before Amy could answer, Jake began talking about his own childhood. His voice was calm and steady, like a grandfather telling stories to his grandchildren. "I grew up on a ranch in Montana. My grandfather owned about 15,000 acres of land spread across several different valleys. Each valley had different grass, different water sources, different weather patterns. Some areas were good for cattle in spring, but too hot in summer. Others were perfect for winter grazing but had dangerous streams during snowmelt." Amy listened carefully, though she still didn't understand where this was leading. "Every season, my grandfather had to move about 2,000 head of cattle between these different areas. He had to consider the weather, the condition of the grass, the water levels, predators like wolves and bears, diseases, market prices, and the individual personalities of both the cattle and the ranch hands who worked for him." Jake paused and pointed to a cargo ship that was carefully maneuvering between 2 larger vessels near the station. "The interesting thing was that my grandfather never used computers or complex mathematics. He couldn't even read very well, but he managed one of the most successful ranches in the state for over 40 years. How did he do it, sir? He understood something that I think these advanced civilizations have forgotten," Jake said. "Complex systems work best when you don't try to control every detail from the center. Instead, you create simple rules and let the people closest to each situation make the decisions they need to make." Amy was starting to see where this might be going, but she still had doubts. "Sir, that might work for cattle, but we're talking about mining operations across 17 different star systems." Jake smiled and continued his story. "When I joined the military, I thought modern warfare would be completely different from ranch work, and in some ways it was. We had satellites, computers, instant communication, and weapons that my grandfather couldn't have imagined." He gestured. toward a busy section of space where multiple ships were moving in careful coordination, like a dance choreographed by necessity rather than central planning. But during the Titan colony conflict, I commanded a logistics operation that had to supply 47 different bases across 6 different moons. Each base had different needs, different threats, different local conditions. Some were dealing with radiation storms. Others faced hostile native life. A few were located in areas where our equipment worked differently because of magnetic fields. Amy found herself getting drawn into the story, despite her worry about the time limit. The first thing my superiors tried was exactly what you'd expect. They created a massive central command system that tracked every supply ship, every piece of equipment, every soldier's location. They tried to plan everything down to the smallest detail and coordinate it all from headquarters. Did it work? It was a disaster, Jake said with a laugh. Ships arrived at the wrong bases. Equipment got sent to places that didn't need it, while critical supplies went to bases that were running out of ammunition. The communication delays alone made it impossible to respond to changing situations. Jake pointed to a small ship that was making quick course corrections as it navigated around a larger vessel. So I tried something different. Instead of trying to control everything from the center, I gave each base commander the authority to make decisions about their local situation. I set up simple rules for sharing resources between nearby bases. Most importantly, I stopped trying to predict every problem and instead focused on making sure each base could adapt to whatever they encountered, and that worked better, much better. The bases started trading supplies based on their actual needs rather than what some computer thought they should need. Commanders shared information about local threats and opportunities. When one base discovered a more efficient way to handle their equipment, the knowledge spread naturally to other bases facing similar problems. Amy was beginning to understand, but she still had concerns. Sir, that's impressive, but the Helix Consortium problem is even more complex. We're talking about coordinating across hundreds of light years with communication delays, different species working together, and profit margins that don't allow for mistakes. Jake nodded seriously. You're right, Amy. It is more complex, but I think that's exactly why the centralized approach has failed for everyone else. He turned away from the window and looked directly at her. Think about it. The Valdorians tried to solve it using their telepathic abilities to create perfect coordination. The Mentari used supercomputers to calculate optimal solutions. The Kethtal tried to control everything through their hive mind. What's wrong with those approaches? They all assume that perfect information and perfect control are possible. But what happens when your perfect plan meets an unexpected solar storm? Or when your calculations don't account for a species you've never worked with before? Or when your telepathic coordination fails because one of your key people gets sick? Amy thought about this for a moment. The system breaks down. Exactly. But what if instead of trying to create a perfect system, we created a flexible system? What if instead of trying to control everything from the center, we empowered each mining team to make good decisions about their local situation? Jake walked over to a display terminal and called up the holographic image of the 17 star systems that Zarathus had shown them. But instead of looking at it as a single complex problem, he began pointing to individual systems. Look at System 7 with its shifting gravity anomalies. Instead of trying to predict and plan for every change from headquarters, what if the mining team there became experts in dealing with gravity shifts? They could develop techniques, equipment, and schedules that work best for their specific situation. Amy studied the display, and System 12 with the hostile life forms. The team there becomes specialists in handling that particular threat. They learn the behavior patterns, develop defensive strategies, maybe even figure out ways to work around the creatures instead of fighting them. As Jake talked, Amy could see how each system's unique challenges might actually become advantages if the local teams were empowered to become experts in their specific situations. But sir, How do you coordinate 17 independent teams to work toward the same goals? Jake smiled. That's where human experience with cooperation really shines, Amy. We've been doing it for thousands of years. The main assembly hall buzzed with nervous energy as the 72-hour deadline arrived. Delegates from across the galaxy filled their seats, eager to witness what most expected to be humanity's spectacular failure. Word had spread throughout the station about Zarathus's challenge, and even beings who weren't part of the official negotiations had found excuses to attend. Zarathus sat at her prominent table in the center of the room, her crystalline features reflecting the lights, as she prepared to enjoy her moment of triumph. She had spent the morning receiving congratulations from her allies, who praised her clever strategy for exposing humanity's limitations. Her confidence was absolute. The primitive mammals have had ample time to embarrass themselves, she told her chief aide, Veltar. I almost feel sorry for them, almost. Around the room, other delegates showed varying degrees of sympathy or anticipation. The Kethmori elders looked genuinely sad, having grown to respect Jake during the negotiations. The Thorian traders seemed nervous, perhaps worried about the precedent of publicly humiliating newer species. But several civilizations aligned. With the Valdorians watched with obvious excitement. Jake Morrison entered the hall, carrying nothing but a simple tablet and wearing the same calm expression he had maintained throughout the challenge. Behind him walked Captain Lisa Grant and Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, both looking more confident than anyone expected. The change in Amy was particularly noticeable. Her earlier nervousness had been replaced by something that looked almost like excitement. As Jake approached the central podium, conversations throughout the hall gradually died down. Zarathus leaned forward slightly, ready to savor her victory. She had prepared a speech about the natural order of galactic civilization and the importance of recognizing one's limitations. Distinguished delegates, Jake began in his steady, clear voice. I want to thank Representative Zarathus for presenting humanity with this fascinating challenge. The Helix Consortium coordination problem has indeed proven difficult for many advanced civilizations. Zarathus smiled smugly. She expected him to admit defeat gracefully, which would be almost as satisfying as watching him fail completely. After careful consideration, Jake continued, I believe the problem has been so difficult because everyone has been approaching it with the same basic assumptions. This wasn't the speech Zarathus had expected. She frowned slightly, but remained confident. Whatever clever excuses the human offered, he still had to present an actual solution. Jake activated his tablet, and a new holographic display appeared above the podium. But instead of showing complex mathematical formulas or technological schematics, it displayed something much simpler. The 17 star systems appeared as connected nodes, but the connections looked more like a web than the rigid hierarchical structure everyone expected. Most attempts to solve this problem have focused on creating a central control system that manages every detail of the operation, Jake explained. This approach fails because it assumes perfect information, perfect communication, and perfect predictability. In reality, none of these things exist. Several delegates leaned forward with interest. This was not the technical presentation they had anticipated. Instead, I propose a decentralized approach based on principles that humans have used successfully for thousands of years. Each mining operation becomes an independent team with the authority to make decisions about their local situation. Success comes not from central control, but from cooperation and adaptation. Zarathus felt the first flicker of concern. This didn't sound like the desperate scrambling she had expected. Jake gestured to the holographic display, and the connections between systems began to pulse with different colors. Each mining team specializes in handling their system's unique challenges. The team in System 7 becomes expert at dealing with gravity anomalies. The team in System 12 develops the best methods for working around hostile life forms. System 4's team masters the art of protecting equipment from solar storms. The Thorian trademaster, Beckstar, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. But human Jake, how do you ensure coordination between these independent teams? Excellent question, Jake replied. The coordination happens through simple rules and direct communication between neighboring systems, instead of reporting everything to a central authority and waiting for instructions. Teams share information and resources directly with each other. Jake highlighted several connections on the display. For example, if System 3 discovers that their solar storm early warning system works better than expected, they share that information with System 4, which faces similar storms. If System 9 develops efficient techniques for asteroid mining, they teach those methods to Systems 8 and 10. Elder Vorthak of the Kethmori spoke up. This approach would require great trust between different species and organizations. True, Jake acknowledged. But it also creates incentives for cooperation. Each team succeeds when their neighbors succeed. If System 7's gravity experts help System 8 solve a similar problem, System 8's increased productivity benefits everyone in the network. As Jake continued explaining his approach, Zarathus realized with growing alarm that his solution was not only coherent, but actually addressed many of the problems that had plagued previous attempts. Worse, several neutral delegates were nodding with interest and asking intelligent questions that showed they took the proposal seriously. The key insight, Jake said, is that complexity requires flexibility, not control. When you try to plan every detail from the center, any unexpected change breaks your entire system. When you empower local teams to adapt and cooperate, the system becomes stronger when faced with challenges. A Kethdel representative raised one of her forearms. Human Morrison, this approach sounds appealing in theory, but what about the mathematics? How do you optimize efficiency across 17 systems without central calculations? Jake smiled. That's perhaps the most important part. Instead of trying to calculate the optimal solution, we let optimization emerge naturally from the network. Teams that develop better methods share them with their neighbors. Successful techniques spread throughout the system. Inefficient approaches get replaced quickly because they hurt the teams that use them. The room was completely silent now. Even beings who had expected to enjoy humanity's humiliation were listening carefully to every word. Think of it like a natural ecosystem, Jake continued. No central authority tells a forest how to grow, but forests develop incredibly efficient systems for sharing resources, processing waste, and adapting to changes. The key is creating the right conditions for cooperation, rather than trying to control every interaction. Jake activated another part of his display, showing how information and resources would flow through the network of mining operations. Communication delays actually become an advantage in this system. Instead of waiting for instructions from headquarters, each team can respond immediately to changes in their local situation. They coordinate with nearby teams who face similar challenges, and successful adaptations spread through the network faster than any central planning system could manage. Zarathus felt her confidence cracking. Not only was Jake's solution well thought out, but it addressed specific problems that her own people had struggled with during their attempt to solve the coordination challenge. A neutral delegate from the Coran Federation asked, "Commander Morrison, how would you handle the profit optimization requirements? The margins for this operation are extremely tight." Another excellent question, Jake replied. Traditional approaches try to maximize profits through perfect efficiency, but they fail because they can't adapt to real-world variations. Our approach maximizes profits through resilience and continuous improvement. Jake highlighted specific connections on his display. When unexpected problems arise, instead of shutting down operations while headquarters develops new plans, local teams can adapt immediately. When one team discovers a cost-saving technique, it spreads to other teams within days rather than months. He paused and looked directly at Zarathus. Most importantly, this approach treats every member of the operation as an intelligent problem solver, rather than a simple executor of someone else's plan. It turns out that beings are much more effective when they're empowered to use their intelligence, rather than just following orders. The room remained silent as delegates absorbed the implications of what they had heard. Jake's solution wasn't just technically sound. It challenged fundamental assumptions about how complex operations should be managed. Finally, Elder Vorthak spoke. "Commander Morrison, your approach is remarkably elegant. But has such a system ever been tested on this scale?" Jake's smile grew wider. Elder Vorthak systems like this have been tested billions of times, across thousands of years, on countless worlds. Every successful civilization in this room uses decentralized cooperation for most of their daily activities. The question isn't whether the approach works, but why we keep forgetting it when we try to solve big problems. The silence in the assembly hall stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then, Elder Vorthak of the Keth Mori slowly stood up, his ancient eyes bright with something that looked like wonder. "Commander Morrison," he said, in his deep, rumbling voice, "in 800 years of life, I have rarely encountered such clarity of thought. Your solution is not just workable, it is brilliant in its simplicity." Other delegates began to stir and murmur among themselves. The Thorian trademaster Beckstar was rapidly calculating something on his portable device. A representative from the Koran Federation leaned over to whisper excitedly with her aide. Even some of the Valdorian allies looked troubled as they realized the implications of what they had just heard. But all eyes eventually turned to Zarathis. She sat frozen at her central table, her crystalline features reflecting the lights and patterns that showed her inner turmoil. The trap she had set so carefully had not only failed, but had become a platform for humanity to demonstrate exactly the kind of innovative thinking that made them valuable partners. Jake remained at the podium, waiting patiently for the formal response he knew must come. His calm demeanor never wavered, but those who knew him well could see the slight tension around his eyes. He had solved the problem, but the political consequences were still uncertain. Finally, Zarathis stood. Her movements were slower than usual, lacking the confident grace she had displayed throughout the negotiations. When she spoke, her voice carried none of its earlier mockery. "Commander Morrison," she said, and paused as if the words were difficult to form. "Your presentation was most unexpected." Jake nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Representative Zarathis. I hope it addresses the coordination challenges you outlined." "It does more than that," she admitted reluctantly. "Your approach identifies fundamental flaws in the methods my own people attempted to use." The admission sent ripples of surprise through the assembly. Valdorians rarely acknowledged errors, and never in public forums. Beckstar, the Thorian, stood up, his mandibles clicking with excitement. "Commander Morrison, I have run preliminary calculations. Based on your network model, the efficiency projections are remarkable. This approach could reduce operational costs by 30% while increasing adaptability to unexpected problems." Other delegates began to voice their support. A Mentari technician admitted that their computer models had failed because they had assumed central control was necessary. A Kethbel Hive speaker noted that even their collective consciousness had struggled with the communication delays across such vast distances. But Jake's attention remained focused on Zer. He could see that she was struggling with something deeper than simple political defeat. The proud Valdorian leader seemed genuinely shaken by the encounter. During the break that followed, as delegates scattered into small groups to discuss the implications of Jake's presentation, Zarathis approached him directly. Her usual entourage of advisors hung back, sensing that their leader needed to handle this conversation personally. "Commander Morrison," she said quietly, "I believe I owe you a private conversation." Jake nodded and gestured toward a smaller meeting room adjacent to the main hall. They walked in silence, followed at a discreet distance by Lisa Grant and Veltara Zarathis' chief aide. Once the door closed behind them, Zarathis seemed to deflate slightly. The regal bearing that had defined her public presence gave way to something more vulnerable. "I must ask you directly," she said. "How did you solve a problem that defeated the finest minds of dozens of advanced civilizations?" Jake considered his answer carefully. "Representative Zarathus, I don't think I'm smarter than any of the beings who tried before me. I just approached the problem differently." "But how?" she pressed. "Your species lacks our telepathic abilities. You don't have the Mentori computational power, or the Kethdel collective consciousness. By every measure we use to evaluate intelligence and capability, humans should have been the least likely species to find a solution." Jake walked to the room's small window and looked out at the stars. "That's exactly why we were able to solve it. We didn't have advanced abilities to rely on, so we had to find a different way." "I don't understand." Jake turned back to face her. "Zarathus, your telepathic abilities are remarkable, but they made you assume that perfect coordination was possible. The Mentari's computers led them to believe that perfect calculations would provide perfect solutions. Every advanced species tried to use their greatest strengths to create perfect control systems, and that was wrong. Not wrong, exactly, but limiting. When you believe you can achieve perfect control, you design systems that require perfect control. When those systems encounter imperfection, which is inevitable in the real world, they break down completely." Zarathus sat down heavily in one of the room's chairs. "So our advantages became disadvantages. In this specific situation, yes. Humans succeed at coordination problems not because we're more advanced, but because we've had to learn to work together despite our limitations. We can't read each other's minds, so we've developed ways to communicate clearly. We can't process massive amounts of data instantly, so we've learned to focus on the most important information. We can't control everything, so we've gotten good at adapting when things go wrong. But surely there are problems where advanced abilities provide clear benefits." Jake smiled. "Absolutely. There are many challenges where telepathic coordination or advanced computation would be invaluable. The point isn't that humans are superior, it's that different approaches work better for different problems." Zarathus was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than Jake had ever heard it. "Commander Morrison, I fear I have made a terrible error in judgment. I allowed my pride and my people's abilities to blind me to the value of other perspectives. Every species struggles with that tendency. It's natural to assume that our own strengths are the most important ones. But I went beyond that. I publicly mocked your people and attempted to humiliate you with an impossible challenge." Jake nodded. "You did, but that challenge also gave us the opportunity to demonstrate our value to the galactic community. In a way, you helped us more than a dozen friendly introductions might have." Zarathus looked up sharply. "You're not angry about the insults?" "I was disappointed," Jake admitted. "But anger wouldn't have helped humanity's cause. Besides, your challenge forced me to think more clearly about what humans actually bring to galactic civilization." "And what is that?" Jake sat down across from her. "We bring a different way of looking at problems. We bring thousands of years of experience in cooperative problem solving. We bring the ability to find simple solutions to complex challenges. Most importantly, we bring the understanding that diversity of thought and approach makes everyone stronger." Zarathus stared at him for a long moment. "You make it sound so obvious." "It should be obvious. But sometimes, the most important truths are the hardest to see, especially when pride gets in the way." When they returned to the main assembly hall, the atmosphere had changed completely. Instead of the tense anticipation that had marked the beginning of Jake's presentation, there was now excited discussion about implementing his coordination approach. Elder Vorthak had taken the lead in organizing a formal review committee to examine the technical details of Jake's proposal. Representatives from a dozen species were volunteering to participate in pilot programs. Even some of Zarathus's former allies were distancing themselves from her earlier, hostile position. But the most significant change came when Zarathus requested permission to address the assembly. "Fellow delegates," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "I stand before you to acknowledge a serious error in judgment on my part." The room fell silent. Public apologies were rare in galactic politics, especially from proud species like the Valdorians. I challenged Commander Morrison and humanity to solve the Helix Consortium problem not as a genuine test of abilities, but as an attempt to expose what I believed were their limitations. I was wrong to doubt their capabilities, and I was wrong to use this forum for such purposes. She paused and looked directly at Jake. More importantly, I was wrong about the nature of intelligence and problem-solving ability. Commander Morrison has demonstrated that innovation often comes from unexpected perspectives, and that cooperation between different approaches creates better solutions than any single method alone. The apology continued for several more minutes, but Jake found himself focusing on the broader implications. Zarathus wasn't just apologizing for her behavior. She was publicly endorsing a fundamental change in how the galactic community evaluated and welcomed new species. When the formal sessions ended that day, Jake found himself surrounded by delegates, wanting to discuss cooperation agreements, technology exchanges, and joint ventures. The Helix Consortium problem had become secondary to the larger question of how different species could work together more effectively. Captain Lisa Grant approached him as the crowd finally thinned. "Sir, I have to ask, did you know this would happen when you accepted Zarathus's challenge?" Jake smiled. "I knew that the problem was solvable, and I suspected that our approach would surprise them. But honestly, Lisa, I didn't expect Zarathus to respond with such grace and wisdom." "What do you mean?" "She could have dismissed our solution or found excuses to reject it. Instead, she chose to learn from the experience and change her perspective. That takes real strength of character." As they walked back to their quarters, Jake noticed Zarathus standing alone at one of the observation windows, looking out at the stars, much as he had done 3 days earlier. On impulse, he approached her. "Representative Zarathus, are you all right?" She turned, and Jake could see that her crystalline features showed something he had never expected to see from a proud Valdorian: genuine humility. "I am learning, Commander Morrison, learning that there is much about the universe that I still don't understand." Jake nodded. "That's the most important lesson any of us can learn. The moment we think we know everything is the moment we stop growing." Zarathus smiled, and for the first time, it was completely genuine. "Perhaps you could teach me more about this human approach to cooperation. I believe my people could benefit from such knowledge." "I'd be honored to, Zarathus. After all, the best solutions come from combining different perspectives." As Jake looked out at the stars, he reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. Humanity had not only earned their place in the galactic community, but had also helped create a new understanding of how different species could work together. Sometimes the greatest victories came not from defeating your opponents, but from helping them see the world in a new way.